Meeting of the Internal Mind by David Russo. What if every decision you've ever made wasn't really made by you, but by a room full of voices inside you, arguing, negotiating, persuading, and sometimes sabotaging each other? Imagine this, a table inside your mind. At one end sits logic precise, calculating, cautious. Across from it sits emotion passionate, reactive, alive. In the corner, your past quietly whispers old patterns, while your intuition leans back, seeing things no one else can explain. And somewhere near the door, your fears keep trying to shut the meeting down entirely. Now ask yourself, who's actually in charge? Because whether you realize it or not, your life is the outcome of these internal meetings, and most of us have never learned how to run them. Introduction. The idea of a meeting of the minds has long been associated with alignment moments when two or more people come together, exchange ideas, and arrive at a shared understanding. It's what fuels innovation, strengthens relationships, and drives progress. When great thinkers align, something powerful is created. But what if the most important meeting of the minds isn't happening between people? What if it's happening within you every single day? Beneath the surface of your thoughts, decisions, and actions is a constant dialogue. Not a single voice, but many, each one shaped by different experiences, priorities, fears, and desires. Each one trying, in its own way, to guide you. There is the part of you that wants certainty, clear plans, logical steps, predictable outcomes. There is another part that craves feeling connection, excitement, meaning. One part holds onto past experiences, replaying lessons and mistakes, while another tries to push forward into possibility. And then there are quieter voices, intuition, instinct, even a sense of purpose that often get drowned out in the noise. These voices are not random. They are not flaws. They are functions. The challenge is not that they exist, it's that they rarely agree. You've likely felt this conflict before, even if you didn't have words for it. The hesitation before making a big decision. The internal tug-of-war between what feels right and what seems logical. The frustration of knowing what you should do, but doing something else anyway. The moments where you feel completely aligned and clear, and the moments where everything feels scattered and uncertain. This is what happens when the internal meeting is either unstructured or unattended. Most people move through life reacting to whichever voice speaks the loudest in the moment. Sometimes that voice is fear, sometimes it's impulse, sometimes it's habit, and occasionally it's clarity. But without awareness, there is no leadership, only reaction. This book offers a different approach. Instead of trying to silence parts of yourself, you will learn to recognize them. Instead of labeling certain thoughts or feelings as good or bad, you will begin to understand their role. And instead of being pulled in different directions, you will learn how to bring these internal voices into alignment, because the goal is not control, it's coordination. When logic and emotion work together, decisions become both smart and meaningful. When the subconscious is understood, patterns can be reshaped instead of repeated. When intuition is given space, clarity emerges in ways that logic alone cannot produce. And when all parts of your mind are working toward the same outcome, life begins to feel less like a struggle and more like a direction. You are not broken. You are not inconsistent. You are not lacking discipline. You are complex. And within that complexity is the potential for clarity, confidence, and purpose if you learn how to run the meeting. This is your invitation to step inside your own mind, take a seat at the table, and begin to understand the voices that shape your life. Because the meeting is already happening, it's time to lead it. Chapter 1. The original meeting of minds. Long before we begin to understand the conversations happening within ourselves, we are introduced to the idea of agreement through others. A meeting of the minds is often described as a moment when two people reach mutual understanding, when ideas align, perspectives connect, and something new is formed as a result. It's a phrase rooted in collaboration, but more importantly, in clarity. Throughout history, progress has depended on these moments, when inventors, thinkers, and leaders came together with different viewpoints. Something powerful happened, not because they thought the same way, but because they were willing to engage, challenge, and refine each other's thinking. Innovation was rarely the result of a single voice. It was the outcome of many voices finding alignment. But what made those meetings effective wasn't just intelligence or talent, it was structure. There was a process, an exchange, a willingness to listen, to question, and ultimately to arrive at a shared direction. Without that, even the greatest minds would have remained stuck in disagreement, unable to move forward. Now consider this. If alignment between people can create progress externally, what happens when alignment is missing internally? Most of us assume that our thoughts come from a single, unified source, that I am the one thinking, deciding, and acting. But if you pay close attention, that assumption begins to break down. You've likely experienced moments where part of you wants one thing, while another part wants something completely different. One voice says, be responsible. Another says, take the risk. One part urges patience. Another demands immediate action. This isn't confusion, it's contrast, and that contrast reveals something important. The same dynamic that exists between people exists within you. Your mind is not a single thinker. It is a system of perspectives. Each perspective has its own role. Logic evaluates, emotion reacts, memory recalls, instinct warns, intuition suggests. None of these are inherently right or wrong, but when they operate without coordination, they create noise instead of direction. Imagine trying to run a meeting where everyone speaks at once, no one listens, and no clear decision is ever made. The result wouldn't just be inefficiency, it would be frustration, hesitation, and eventually, inaction. This is how many people live their lives. Decisions get delayed, opportunities are missed, patterns repeat, not because of a lack of ability, but because there is no internal alignment, no clear outcome from the meeting. The truth is, your external life often reflects your internal organization. When your thoughts are scattered, your actions tend to be inconsistent. When your internal voices are in conflict, your results often feel unstable. But when there is clarity, when the meeting produces alignment, your actions become more decisive, and your direction becomes more intentional. This is the foundation of everything that follows. Before you can improve your decisions, you must first understand the nature of the decision-makers within you. Before you can create consistency in your life, you must recognize the parts of you that are pulling in different directions. And before you can lead yourself effectively, you must first acknowledge that there is more than one voice to lead. The idea of a meeting of the minds was never limited to groups, partnerships, or history. It has been happening within you all along. The difference is, up until now, no one has shown you how to recognize it, let alone how to guide it. That's where this journey begins. Chapter 2. You are not one voice. From a young age, most of us are taught to think of ourselves as singular. We say I think, I feel, I want, as if every thought, emotion, and desire comes from one consistent source. It sounds simple, it sounds clean, but it isn't accurate. If you slow down and observe your own thinking even for a single day, you'll start to notice something unusual. Your thoughts don't always agree with each other. Your feelings don't always match your logic. Your actions don't always reflect what you know is best. One moment, you're motivated and focused. The next, you're distracted and avoiding what matters. One part of you wants long-term success. Another part reaches for short-term comfort. One voice encourages discipline, while another quietly negotiates for delay. This isn't weakness. It isn't a lack of willpower. It's evidence. Evidence that you are not operating from a single voice but from a collection of internal perspectives, each with its own priorities, fears, and intentions. Think of it this way. If your mind were truly one unified voice, decision-making would be effortless. There would be no hesitation, no second-guessing, no internal debate. You would simply identify what is best and do it. But that's not how real life works. Instead, decisions often feel like negotiations. You weigh options. You justify choices. You argue with yourself. Sometimes you even convince yourself to do something you weren't originally going to do. And other times, you walk away wondering, why did I do that? These moments reveal the truth. There are multiple forces at play within you. There is a part of you that is driven by logic, focused on outcomes, consequences, and strategy. There is another part that is guided by emotion, responding to how things feel in the moment. there is a deeper layer shaped by past experiences, your subconscious, quietly influencing your habits and reactions without asking for permission. And then there are more subtle elements, like intuition, which offers insight without explanation, and ego, which seeks identity, control, and protection. Each of these voices serves a purpose. Logic helps you plan. Emotion helps you connect. The subconscious helps you operate efficiently. Intuition helps you sense what isn't obvious. Ego helps you define and defend your sense of self. None of them are the enemy. The problem arises when one voice dominates without input from the others, or when they operate in complete isolation. When emotion overrides logic, decisions can become reactive. When logic suppresses emotion, life can feel empty or disconnected. When the subconscious runs unchecked, old patterns repeat themselves, even when they no longer serve you. Without awareness, these parts don't collaborate, they compete. And when they compete, you experience conflict. You feel stuck between options. You start something and don't finish it. You set goals but struggle to follow through. Not because you don't care, but because different parts of you are pulling in different directions. This is where most people get it wrong. They try to eliminate the conflict. They try to silence emotion, ignore fear, override instinct, or fix themselves into consistency. But the goal is not to become one voice. The goal is to understand the voices you already have. Because clarity doesn't come from forcing silence. It comes from recognizing who is speaking and why. When you begin to identify these internal perspectives, something shifts. You stop taking every thought at face value. You stop reacting automatically. You begin to pause, observe, and question. Instead of being inside the argument, you start to see the argument itself. And in that space, something powerful emerges. Choice. You are no longer just the voice speaking, you become the one listening, the one evaluating, the one deciding which voice to follow, and when. This is the beginning of internal leadership. You are not one voice. You are the one who can bring those voices together. Chapter 3. The Left Brain and the Right Brain. One of the most common ways people try to understand the mind is by dividing it into two parts, the left brain and the right brain. You've probably heard it before. The left side is logical, analytical, and structured, while the right side is creative, intuitive, and expressive. While modern science shows that the brain is far more interconnected than this simple split suggests, the idea still holds value, not as a strict biological rule, but as a powerful way to understand to very real modes of thinking that show up in your daily life. In the context of your internal meeting, these are two of the most influential voices at the table. The left brain voice is the one that seeks order. It wants plans, timelines, and clear steps. It asks practical questions. What's the goal? What's the risk? What's the most efficient path forward? This voice values logic, evidence, and predictability. It's the part of you that makes lists, analyzes decisions, and tries to avoid mistakes. Sitting across from it is the right brain voice, the one that doesn't always follow a straight line. This voice is driven by imagination, curiosity, and possibility. It asks different questions. What feels right? What could this become? What if we tried something new? It thrives on creativity, expression, and big picture thinking. It's the part of you that dreams, experiments, and sees potential where others see uncertainty. Neither of these voices is better than the other, but they often disagree. The logical voice might look at a new opportunity and immediately calculate the risks, the costs, and the likelihood of failure. It wants certainty before it moves. The creative voice, on the other hand, sees excitement, growth, and potential. It's willing to move without having every answer. One says, be careful. The other says, take the chance. One says, stick to the plan. The other says, what if there's a better way? This tension is not a flaw, it's a feature, because when these two voices work together, something powerful happens. Logic provides structure to creativity, turning ideas into actionable plans. Creativity brings life to logic, ensuring that those plans are not just efficient, but meaningful and inspired. Without logic, creativity can become scattered, full of ideas, but lacking direction. Without creativity, logic can become rigid, efficient, but uninspired and limited. Think about moments in your life where you felt truly aligned. Chances are, both of these voices were involved. You had a vision of what you wanted, but you also had a plan to make it real. You felt excited, but you also felt grounded. That's what a successful internal meeting looks like. The problem is, most people tend to favor one voice over the other. Some rely heavily on logic. They analyze every decision, plan every detail, and avoid uncertainty whenever possible. While this can create stability, it can also lead to missed opportunities, overthinking, and a life that feels controlled but not fully lived. Others lean toward creativity and instinct. They follow what feels right in the moment, explore freely, and resist structure. While this can lead to exciting experiences, it can also create inconsistency, lack of follow-through, and unnecessary risk. In both cases, the imbalance creates limitation. The goal is not to choose between these voices, it's to integrate them, to allow logic to ask the hard questions without shutting down possibility, to allow creativity to explore new paths without ignoring reality, to let each voice do what it does best while still working toward a shared outcome. When you begin to recognize these two modes of thinking within yourself, you can start to notice when one is overpowering the other. You can pause and ask, is this decision grounded but limited, or inspired but unstructured? And then, you can bring the other voice into the conversation, because the strongest decisions, the ones that move your life forward, are rarely purely logical or purely creative. They are the result of both sides meeting in the middle, not competing, but collaborating. Chapter 4, Conscious versus Subconscious. If the voices in your mind were ranked by how much influence they have over your life, the conscious mind would feel like the leader. It's the part of you that thinks, plans, decides, and speaks. It's what you're aware of in real time, the voice you hear when you say, I need to do better, or this is the right choice. It sets goals, makes promises, and imagines a better future. But influence and awareness are not the same thing, because beneath that voice, quiet, automatic, and often unnoticed, it's the subconscious. And in many ways, it runs the meeting. The subconscious mind is not concerned with what you want in the moment. It is shaped by what you've repeatedly experienced, believed, and practiced over time. It stores patterns. It builds habits. It remembers emotional responses and attaches them to situations, often without your permission. While your conscious mind says, start fresh, your subconscious quietly asks, based on what you've done before. This is why change can feel so difficult. You can consciously decide to wake up earlier, eat healthier, take risks, or think more positively. You can say all the right things and even feel motivated for a short time. But if your subconscious is conditioned to do the opposite, to seek comfort, avoid discomfort, or repeat familiar behaviors, it will eventually pull you back, not because it's against you, but because it's consistent. The subconscious values efficiency and familiarity. Its primary goal is not growth, it's survival. It wants to conserve energy and avoid uncertainty, so it relies on patterns even if those patterns no longer serve you. This is why people often feel like they are stuck in a loop. They're not lacking awareness. In fact, many people know exactly what they should do. The conflict comes from the disconnect between the conscious decision and the subconscious programming behind it. One voice says, this is who I want to become. The other says, this is who you've always been. And when those two don't align, the subconscious usually wins, not through force, but through repetition. Think about habits in your own life, the way you respond to stress, the routines you fall into without thinking, the automatic thoughts that show up in certain situations. These are not random, they are learned patterns, reinforced over time until they became automatic. The subconscious doesn't debate, it executes. And you can see this clearly in the simplest parts of your life. There are things you do every day without even thinking about them. You don't sit there and debate whether to brush your teeth. You don't negotiate whether to take a shower. There's no internal argument, no discussion. The decision has already been made so many times that it no longer requires one. That's the subconscious doing its job. But then look at something like working out, or eating better, or doing something you know is good for you but don't feel like doing. Suddenly, the meeting is back. I'm tired. I'll start tomorrow. I have other things to do. I'm not in the mood. Now it's a conversation, a debate, sometimes even a negotiation. Same person, different behavior. The difference isn't motivation, it's programming. The things you do automatically are easier because they require less effort. They're easier because they require less decision. The meeting never happens because the outcome has already been agreed upon. That's what makes habits so powerful, and also why they can feel so difficult to build. Because in the beginning, every action requires a meeting. Every choice is debated. Every step forward feels like resistance. But with repetition, something shifts. What once required effort becomes automatic. What once felt unnatural becomes normal. And eventually, what once required discipline becomes identity. But here's the important part. The subconscious is not fixed. It is programmable. Every habit you have today was once a conscious choice repeated enough times to become automatic. Every belief you hold was shaped by experiences that you interpreted and stored, which means that while the subconscious may be running based on the past, it can be reshaped in the present. The key is bringing awareness into the meeting. When you begin to notice your patterns instead of blindly following them, you interrupt the automatic process. When you question your default reactions, you create space for change. And when your conscious decisions are backed by consistent action, the subconscious begins to update. Slowly at first, but powerfully over time. This is where real transformation happens, not in a single decision, but in the alignment between what you choose consciously and what you reinforce subconsciously, because when those two voices begin to work together, something shifts. Effort becomes easier, discipline becomes more natural, and the person you're trying to become no longer feels like a constant fight. It starts to feel like who you are. The meeting changes when the conscious mind stops trying to overpower the subconscious and starts training it instead, because the most effective decisions are not the ones you make once. They're the ones your mind learns to repeat. Chapter 5. Emotion versus Logic, the eternal debate. If there is one conversation that defines the internal meeting more than any other, it is the ongoing debate between emotion and logic. This is the moment when the room gets tense. Logic sits forward, organized and composed, presenting facts, outcomes, and consequences. It speaks in clear terms. This makes sense. This is efficient. This is the right move based on what we know. Emotion responds differently. It doesn't rely on charts or evidence. It speaks through feeling, sometimes calmly, sometimes intensely. This doesn't feel right. This matters to me. This hurts. This excites me. And just like that, the debate begins. Most people have been taught directly or indirectly that one of these voices should win, that logic is reliable and emotion is risky, or, on the other side, that emotion is authentic and logic is limiting, so they pick a side, often without realizing it. But the truth is, both approaches on their own are incomplete. Logic, by itself, can lead to decisions that are technically correct but emotionally empty. You can make the right choice on paper and still feel disconnected from it. You can follow the safest path and still feel unfulfilled. Logic protects you from mistakes, but it doesn't always lead you toward meaning. Emotion, on the other hand, brings energy and depth to your decisions, but without guidance, it can become unpredictable. Emotions shift, they react, they intensify in the moment and fade with time. When decisions are made purely from emotion, they can lead to impulsive actions, regret, or instability. One voice protects, the other connects, and both are necessary. Think about some of the most important decisions in your life: relationships, career moves, personal growth. Were they purely logical? Probably not. Were they purely emotional? Also unlikely. The decisions that shape your life tend to come from a combination of both, something that made sense and felt right. That's not coincidence. That's alignment. The problem arises when emotion and logic stop communicating and start competing. Logic may try to silence emotion, labeling it as irrational or weak. Emotion may resist logic, seeing it as cold or restrictive. And when this happens, you're left with internal conflict, overthinking, second-guessing, feeling pulled into directions at once. You've likely experienced this before. There's a specific kind of moment I've experienced more times than I can count. It's late, later than it should be. I'm sitting there writing or drawing, completely locked in. Everything is flowing. Ideas are connecting. It feels effortless. And I can feel it. If I stop now, it's gone. That's when the meeting starts. Emotion is the first to speak. Don't stop, it says. This is it. This is what you care about. Stay here. Something quieter supports it. This matters, it says. You don't always get moments like this. But then logic leans forward. You have to be up tomorrow, it says. You're going to feel this. You're going to be tired. You won't perform the way you need to. And then another voice joins in, the future version of me. Not emotional, not loud, just clear. You're going to regret this in the morning. Now the room is split. Because every voice is right. Part of me knows this moment is rare, something meaningful, something aligned with who I want to be. And another part of me knows that tomorrow is real. Responsibilities are real. The cost is real. So I sit there, caught between two truths. Keep going, or go to sleep. And for a long time, I treated this like a discipline problem, like one side had to win. Either I was being productive, or I was being irresponsible. Either I had control, or I didn't. But that's not what's actually happening. This isn't a lack of discipline. It's a meeting without structure, because the real question isn't, do I stay up or go to sleep? The real question is, how do I make a decision that respects both the life I'm building and the life I have to live tomorrow? And that's the shift. The goal is not to choose one voice over the other. The goal is to let them inform each other. Logic can ask emotion important questions. Why does this matter? What is this feeling trying to tell us? Emotion, in turn, can challenge logic. Is this decision aligned with what we truly value? Or is it just safe? When these two voices are allowed to work together, decisions become both grounded and meaningful. Logic creates structure. Emotion adds depth. Logic sets direction. Emotion provides motivation. Instead of canceling each other out, they strengthen each other. In the case of that late-night moment, the answer is always the same. Sometimes the aligned decision is to keep going, fully aware of the cost. Sometimes it's to stop capturing the idea, trusting it will return. The decision itself matters less than how it's made, because when the meeting is aligned, there's no regret, only awareness. This is what a productive internal meeting looks like, not a battle for control, but a conversation with purpose. So, the next time you feel that tension, that internal pull between what makes sense and what feels right, don't rush to silence one side. Pause, listen, because that tension is not a problem to solve. It's a signal that the most important voices in the room are finally speaking. And if you let them, they won't just argue. They'll guide you toward a better decision than either one could make alone. Because the goal isn't to win the argument. It's to leave the meeting without fighting yourself the next day. Chapter 6. The Voice of Intuition. Not every voice in the internal meeting is loud. Some don't argue. Some don't present detailed reasoning or emotional intensity. They don't demand attention the way fear does or justify themselves the way logic does. Instead, they arrive quietly, a thought, a feeling, a sense. And just as quickly as they appear, they can disappear, especially if the room is too noisy to notice. This is intuition. It's one of the most misunderstood voices in the mind because it doesn't operate the way the others do. It doesn't explain itself step by step. It doesn't rely on visible evidence. And it doesn't always come with strong emotion. Instead, it offers something far more subtle, a quiet knowing. You've likely experienced it before. A moment where something felt right, even if you couldn't explain why. A situation where you sensed something was off, despite everything looking fine on the surface. A decision that didn't make perfect logical sense, but later proved to be exactly what you needed. That wasn't luck. That was intuition speaking. In the internal meeting, intuition doesn't compete for control. It offers perspective. It sees patterns that your conscious mind hasn't fully processed yet. It draws from past experiences, subtle cues, and deeper awareness. Then delivers its message in a way that bypasses long explanations. The challenge is that intuition is easy to ignore because it doesn't argue. It often gets overshadowed by louder voices. Logic demands proof. Emotion demands attention. Fear demands protection. And in the middle of all that noise, intuition gets dismissed not because it's wrong, but because it's quiet. Many people lose touch with this voice over time. They begin to rely only on what they can measure, explain, or justify, or they become so reactive to emotion that they mistake intensity for truth. In both cases, intuition fades into the background, not gone, but unheard. But when you begin to slow down and pay attention, it becomes easier to recognize. Intuition rarely feels chaotic. It doesn't rush you or pressure you. It tends to show up as calm clarity even in uncertain situations. While fear feels urgent and emotional, intuition feels steady. While overthinking creates confusion, intuition simplifies. It might say, "This is the right direction," or, just as clearly, "Something here isn't right," without a long explanation. That doesn't mean intuition is always easy to follow. In fact, it can be one of the hardest voices to trust, because it often challenges both logic and comfort. It might guide you towards something that doesn't fully make sense yet. It might pull you away from something that appears safe or familiar. It doesn't always align with what's convenient. It aligns with what's true on a deeper level, and that requires trust. Not blind trust, but developed trust, the kind that comes from experience. When you start to notice the difference between impulsive reactions and intuitive guidance, when you reflect on past decisions and recognize the moments where you knew, even if you didn't listen at the time, over time, that awareness strengthens the voice. In the internal meeting, intuition plays a unique role. It doesn't replace logic or emotion, it complements them. It offers insight that logic can evaluate and emotion can connect to. It adds depth to the conversation, pointing toward options that may not be obvious on the surface. When included, it often brings a sense of alignment that is hard to explain, but easy to feel. The key is creating space for it. Moments of pause, reflection, silence. These are the conditions where intuition is most likely to be heard, not in the middle of chaos, but in the absence of it. Because intuition doesn't need to fight for attention, it just needs to be noticed. And when you learn to recognize that quiet voice and give it a seat at the table, you begin to access a level of clarity that goes beyond analysis or reaction. You begin to trust not just what you think or feel, but what you know. Chapter 7. The Spiritual Seat at the Table. Among all the voices in the internal meeting, there is one that often goes undefined. It doesn't always speak in thoughts. It doesn't rely on emotion alone. It isn't shaped only by past experience or immediate logic. And yet, when it is present, it changes the tone of the entire room. This is the spiritual voice. For some, that word carries deep meaning, connection to faith, to God, to something higher. For others, it may feel less defined, more like a sense of purpose, alignment, or inner truth. Regardless of how you interpret it, the spiritual dimension represents something beyond the immediate moment. It is the part of you that asks bigger questions. Why am I here? What truly matters? What kind of life am I meant to live? While other voices focus on decisions, reactions, and outcomes, this one focuses on meaning. In the internal meeting, the spiritual voice doesn't usually argue over small choices. It doesn't get caught up in minor details or short-term concerns. Instead, it provides direction quietly, guiding the conversation towards something deeper than convenience or comfort. It may not always be loud, but when it is acknowledged, it has weight. Think about moments in your life where you felt a strong sense of purpose or alignment, times when your decisions felt connected to something bigger than just immediate results, times when you chose integrity over ease, growth over comfort, or truth over approval. Those moments didn't just come from logic or emotion. They came from a deeper place. The spiritual voice often shows up in subtle ways: a feeling of conviction, a sense of calling, or an inner pull toward a certain direction. It doesn't always provide a full road map, but it gives you a compass. It doesn't answer every question, but it helps you recognize what matters most. The challenge is that, like intuition, this voice can be overlooked. In a world that moves quickly and values measurable results, it's easy to prioritize what is immediate and visible. Logic focuses on efficiency. Emotion reacts to the present. The subconscious repeats the past. And in the middle of all that, the spiritual voice focused on meaning and purpose can be pushed aside, not because it isn't important, but because it isn't urgent. But without it, something is missing. You can make logical decisions and still feel unfulfilled. You can chase emotional highs and still feel empty. You can build habits and achieve goals, yet still question whether it all means something. This is what happens when the meeting lacks depth. The spiritual voice brings that depth. It asks not just what works, but what matters. Not just what do I want, but what aligns with who I am meant to be. It also serves as a grounding force. When fear becomes overwhelming, the spiritual voice can remind you of trust. When ego becomes dominant, it can bring humility. When confusion takes over, it can simplify the conversation by bringing it back to core values and purpose. It doesn't eliminate the other voices, it aligns them. When this voice is present, logic becomes more intentional, emotion becomes more meaningful, and intuition becomes clearer. Decisions are no longer based only on immediate outcomes, but on long-term alignment with something deeper. The important thing to understand is that the spiritual voice doesn't require a specific belief system to exist. For some, it may be rooted in religion or faith. For others, it may be a personal sense of purpose, morality, or connection to something greater than themselves. However it shows up, its role remains the same: to bring meaning, direction, and alignment to the internal meeting. And like every other voice, it becomes stronger when it is acknowledged. When you take time to reflect, to question, to connect with what truly matters to you, you give that voice space to speak. And when it speaks, it doesn't just influence one decision, it shapes the direction of your life. Because at the end of the day, success without meaning feels incomplete. But when your actions align with something deeper, something that reflects who you are and what you stand for, the meeting changes. It becomes more than a discussion about what to do. It becomes a conversation about who you are becoming. Chapter 8. When the meeting breaks down. Not every internal meeting is productive. In fact, for most people, the default state of the mind is a kind of chaos, voices talking over each other, conflicting agendas, and no clear moderator in sight. When that happens, decisions stall, habits falter, and life feels like a constant tug of war. Imagine a meeting where no one listens. Logic presents facts, but emotion interrupts with protests. Fear speaks loudly, drowning out intuition. The subconscious replays old patterns, while the spiritual voice sits quietly in the corner, ignored. No consensus is reached. No action is taken. The result: frustration, confusion, and inaction. This is exactly what happens when your internal voices are misaligned. And sometimes, it shows up in the simplest moments, like deciding what to eat. It sounds small, but it rarely is. You're sitting there, maybe at home, maybe with family, and the question comes up: what's for dinner? And suddenly, the meeting begins. Logic speaks first. You had pizza last night. You should eat something healthier. Emotion responds immediately. But pizza sounds good again. Habit shrugs. This is what we usually do. Convenience jumps in. Just pick something easy. And then the conversation loops. What else is there? I don't feel like cooking. Nothing sounds good. Maybe just order something. Around and around it goes. No decision, just noise. And the longer it goes on, the more frustrating it becomes. Not because the decision is hard, but because no one is actually leading it. This is what a broken meeting looks like. Not a lack of options, not a lack of intelligence, just a lack of structure. You've probably felt it in bigger ways too. Hesitation before a major decision, anxiety that won't go away, or a nagging sense that you're making the wrong choice even though you can't explain why. Sometimes it shows up as self-sabotage, taking actions that go against your best interests. Other times, it's repeating patterns you've promised yourself you'd change. And often, it looks like overthinking, getting stuck in a loop where nothing gets resolved. When the meeting breaks down, every decision becomes a battle. Logic wants one thing, emotion wants another. Fear demands control. You're caught between what you should do, what you want to do, and what you think you can do. And the conflict isn't just uncomfortable, it's exhausting. It drains your energy, your focus, and your confidence. Breakdowns often happen because one or more voices dominate, or because no one voice is taking leadership. Logic might overwhelm emotion, leading to choices that feel correct but empty. Fear might take over, creating avoidance or paralysis. The subconscious may default to old habits, repeating patterns without question, and intuition or purpose may be ignored entirely, leaving decisions flat and disconnected. When these imbalances persist, the meeting doesn't just produce poor decisions, it produces stress, frustration, and a sense of helplessness. You may start questioning your own judgment. You may feel inconsistent, unreliable, or stuck. But the issue isn't you, it's the meeting. The first step toward fixing a broken meeting is awareness. You have to notice what's happening inside, who is speaking, who is being ignored, and how the conversation is unfolding. Without that awareness, most people try to force decisions or rely on discipline, but those efforts often fail because the underlying conflict is still unresolved. The second step is learning to moderate the discussion, not by silencing voices but by organizing them, by asking, who needs to speak right now? Which perspective is missing? What is each voice actually trying to protect or achieve? Because every voice, even the frustrating ones, is trying to serve a purpose. A broken meeting is not permanent. With attention, practice, and intention, you can restore balance. The same voices that once competed can learn to collaborate. Decisions that felt overwhelming can become clear. Patterns that felt automatic can be reshaped. And the energy that was once spent on internal conflict can be redirected toward action. Breakdowns are inevitable, but they are also signals. They tell you that something needs structure, that something needs leadership. They are not failures. They are invitations. Invitations to pause, observe, and step into the role your mind has been waiting for. Because once you begin to lead the meeting, the chaos starts to settle. The noise becomes clearer. The loops begin to break. And even something as simple as deciding what to eat becomes less of a struggle and more of a choice. Choices become more deliberate, patterns become more flexible, and your life begins to feel less like a constant tug of war, and more like a direction you are actively creating. Chapter 9. Running the Meeting. By now, you've met the voices in your internal meeting, the logic that organizes, the emotion that reacts, the subconscious that repeats, the intuition that whispers, and the spiritual presence that guides. You've seen how they interact, sometimes harmoniously, sometimes in conflict. You've even witnessed what happens when the meeting breaks down. Now comes the most important step: learning how to run it. Running the internal meeting doesn't mean silencing certain voices or forcing others to comply. It doesn't mean pretending the conflicts don't exist. Instead, it means taking the role of moderator, aware, intentional, and guiding the conversation toward alignment. It means listening to every voice while ensuring the discussion leads to clarity and action. The first rule is awareness. You cannot manage what you do not notice. Take time to observe your thoughts, emotions, habits, and impulses. Recognize which voices dominate in different situations. Notice when fear, habit, or ego is taking over, and when creativity, intuition, or purpose is being ignored. This observation is not judgment, it's data. Your internal meeting runs on information. The more clearly you understand the room, the more effectively you can guide it. The second rule is clarity of purpose. Every meeting has an agenda, and your internal meeting should too. Define the question or decision at hand. Is it about a career move, a relationship, a habit you want to change? Present the issue clearly to all voices in the room. When each perspective understands what is being decided, they can contribute constructively instead of arguing blindly. The third rule is structured dialogue. Let each voice speak without interruption, but with boundaries. Logic presents facts. Emotion expresses feelings. The subconscious highlights patterns. Intuition offers insight. Spiritual guidance reminds you of meaning. Take notes if needed, mental or physical, and acknowledge each contribution. Then, step back and evaluate. Where is agreement? Where is conflict? What trade-offs are acceptable? The fourth rule is integration. Don't aim to choose one voice over the others. Instead, seek collaboration. Ask, how can logic and emotion work together here? How can past patterns guide but not limit us? How can intuition and purpose inform our action? When voices collaborate, decisions are both intelligent and meaningful, grounded in reality and aligned with your values. The final rule is follow through. Even the best internal meeting is useless without action. Once a decision is made, implement it consciously. Track your habits and patterns to ensure the subconscious reinforces the new choice. Reflect afterward what worked, what didn't. This feedback strengthens future meetings, turning awareness into lasting results. Running the meeting is not a one-time event, it's a habit, a skill, and a mindset. It takes practice, patience, and persistence. Some days will be messy, some voices will resist, but with consistent effort, the internal dialogue becomes smoother, the debates more productive, and the decisions clearer. The internal meeting is always happening. The difference between chaos and clarity is whether you are participating as a passive spectator or stepping into the role of a skilled moderator. When you run the meeting consciously, you don't just make better decisions. You align your life. You transform internal conflict into cooperation. You convert scattered energy into focused action. And that is where true mastery begins. Not controlling your mind, but guiding it toward a shared purpose, where every voice has its role and the meeting ends with clarity, direction, and intentional action. Chapter 10. Applying the internal meeting to life. Once you understand the voices in your mind and how to run the meeting, the question becomes clear. How does this translate into real life? The answer is simple and profound. When your internal meeting functions smoothly, every area of your life benefits. Decisions become clearer, relationships become more harmonious, and your sense of purpose and fulfillment deepens. Take relationships, for example. Most conflicts arise not because people are fundamentally incompatible, but because internal voices are misaligned. Logic may tell you to communicate calmly, while emotion pulls toward anger or hurt. Intuition may sense unspoken tension, while fear reacts defensively. By noticing these voices, acknowledging their concerns, and integrating them, you can respond with both honesty and empathy, rather than react impulsively or suppress your feelings. The result is deeper connection and more meaningful interactions. In family life, running the internal meeting helps you balance priorities. Logic may push you to be efficient with time and resources, while emotion wants to savor moments and nurture closeness. Intuition may sense when a loved one needs attention, and spiritual guidance reminds you of your core values. Recognizing these voices prevents neglect of either responsibility or emotional connection, creating harmony at home rather than tension. Finances are another area shaped by internal meetings. Your logical voice may insist on budgeting, saving, or investing, while emotion craves instant gratification. The subconscious may carry patterns of scarcity or indulgence, and intuition may guide you toward opportunities you can't fully explain. Running the meeting allows these voices to inform one another, producing decisions that are both responsible and aligned with your long-term goals, without ignoring your desires or instincts. When it comes to health and wellness, internal alignment is equally critical. Logic knows the steps needed for disciplined exercise routines, nutrition, sleep, but emotion may resist discomfort, and the subconscious may cling to old habits. Intuition and spiritual guidance can remind you why self-care matters beyond mere obligation. Coordinating these voices makes consistency achievable and sustainable, rather than a constant battle of willpower. Even happiness and personal fulfillment depend on internal collaboration. You cannot rely solely on logic to define joy, nor solely on emotion to chase it. True satisfaction arises when purpose, intuition, creativity, logic, and emotional engagement converge. When all parts of you feel heard, respected, and aligned. In every area, the principle is the same. Life reflects the quality of your internal meeting. Confusion, conflict, and inconsistency outside are echoes of the same dynamics inside. Clarity, balance, and confidence outside arise from harmony inside. The power of this approach is that it's universal. It doesn't depend on circumstances, luck, or external validation. It works whether you're managing a team, raising a family, building a business, or simply trying to live a meaningful life. When you learn to guide the voices within, life stops feeling like a series of battles, compromises, and frustrations. Decisions are not just made, they are owned. Actions are not just taken, they are aligned with your values. And your life begins to feel less like chaos and more like a meeting where every voice has its place, every perspective is acknowledged, and every decision moves you closer to the life you truly want. The meeting is ongoing, The choice is yours. Let it run on autopilot or step in as the moderator who brings clarity, purpose, and harmony to the voices within. Conclusion: leading the meeting of your life. The internal meeting has always been happening. Every choice, every habit, every reaction is shaped by the dialogue of voices inside you. Logic debates with emotion. Subconscious patterns tug against conscious intention. Intuition whispers, while fear protests. And the spiritual seat, often quiet, waits to remind you of purpose and meaning. Until now, you may have felt powerless in this meeting, as though you were a passenger in your own mind, reacting to whichever voice shouted the loudest. But awareness is the first step toward leadership. Recognizing the voices, understanding their roles, and creating space for them to communicate is where your power begins. Running the internal meeting is not about silencing conflict or forcing agreement. It's about listening, integrating, and guiding. Each voice has value, and when all voices are acknowledged, the meeting moves from chaos to clarity. Logic and emotion can collaborate. Conscious intention and subconscious patterns can align. Intuition and spiritual guidance can illuminate direction. When these forces work together, decisions are not only smart, they are meaningful. Throughout this audiobook, we've explored the meetings that happen inside our minds, how logic debates emotion, how habits quietly run the show, and how everyday choices like sleep, meals, and creative work reveal our priorities. These stories aren't just examples. They show how aligning our voices can turn internal chaos into clarity, helping us act with intention, balance passion with responsibility, and build patterns that serve the life we want. The beauty of this approach is its universality. Whether in relationships, family, finances, health, or personal fulfillment, the quality of your internal meeting shapes the quality of your life. Life is no longer a series of battles between competing impulses. It becomes a conversation, a negotiation, a deliberate alignment of all parts of you working toward the same outcome. This book is not a one-time roadmap. It is an invitation to practice. You will have days when the meeting feels chaotic, when fear dominates, or when voices are at odds. That is normal. Leadership does not mean perfection. It means showing up, paying attention, and guiding the conversation with intention. Over time, the practice transforms internal conflict into cooperation, hesitation into clarity, and reaction into choice. The final truth is simple: you are not one voice, but the moderator of all voices. Life does not happen to you. It happens through the alignment of your internal minds. When you step into the role of leader, you take ownership not only of your decisions, but of your direction, your growth, and your fulfillment. So take your seat, listen carefully, ask the hard questions, consider every perspective, and then guide the meeting toward a decision that reflects all of you: the logical, the emotional, the subconscious, the intuitive, and the spiritual. The voices will always be there. The meeting will always continue. But now, for the first time, you can lead it. And that is the difference between living reactively and living intentionally, between chaos and clarity, between surviving and thriving. The meeting is yours. Lead it wisely.